I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
43 at O'Hare. Next news, 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by the Money Hour radio show, Saturday afternoons at 3 on AM 560, The Answer. Brought to you by Pearshell Financial Group.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Mark Zuckerberg, or Zuckerberg as he's sometimes called, was at Georgetown over the weekend talking about, and he also wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal talking about free speech and how Facebook is trying to balance allowing the platform to provide for the free exchange of ideas and beliefs and opinions, while at the same time rooting out content that is dangerous, content that advocates violence, for example. Here's Zuckerberg explaining the construct through which Facebook attempts to operate.
I've focused on building services that do two things: give people a voice and bring people together. Now, some people believe that giving more people a voice is driving division rather than bringing people together. More people across the spectrum believe that achieving the political outcomes that they think matter is more important than every person having a voice and being heard. And I think that that's dangerous. We can either continue to stand for free expression, understanding its messiness, but believing that the long journey towards greater progress requires confronting ideas that challenge us. Or we can decide that the cost is simply too great. Inevitably, some people are going to use their voice to try to organize violence, to try to undermine elections, to hurt others. And we have a responsibility to address these risks. Because when you're serving billions of people, even if a very small percent of them cause harm, that can still be a lot of harm. So we need to address that. And we build specific systems to address each type of harmful content, from incitement of violence to child exploitation to other kinds of harm like intellectual property violations. It's about 20 categories in total. And we judge ourselves by the prevalence of harmful content on our services and by the percent of that content that we find proactively before anyone has to report it to us. Much of the content that those Russian accounts shared was distasteful, but it would have been considered permissible political discourse if it had been shared by real American citizens. So the real issue is that it was posted by fake accounts that were coordinating together and pretending to be people that they were not. And we've seen similar issues with these groups that pump out misinformation like spam just to make money. So the solution here is to verify the identities of anyone who's getting a wide amount of distribution and to get a lot better at identifying and taking down fake accounts. So we now require you to provide a government ID and to prove your location if you want to run political ads or if you're going to run a large page. You can still say controversial things if you want, but you have to stand behind them with your real identity and face accountability.
I don't have any issue with verification. I think that's eminently fair and reasonable. I also don't have any issue with regulating content that advocates violence, although, how broadly defined that is. I mean, I think it needs to be specific. We should go to war here. We shouldn't go to war there. That more like violence directed at somebody that would be illegal in nature, of course, is what I'm referencing. And the other thing that Zuckerberg said I thought was interesting, too, he talked about social media as the fifth estate. The fifth estate. Of course, the press is the fourth estate. Nobility, clergy, everyone else, and then the press. But there needs to be a fifth estate now to act as an accountability mechanism on the fourth estate, is what the implication is. And I agree with that implication, too. Mark Zuckerberg is building bridges to conservatives, it would seem to me, but how does it seem to Jim Pinkerton? Jim Pinkerton, co-chair of the Rate Coalition and contributor to the American Conservative, as well as Breitbart, joins us. Jim, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Morning. So what about Zuckerberg's comments? Now, his comments about Russian Facebook campaigns and stuff didn't sit well on the Hill with Democrats who want him to do deep investigations and regulation of political speech that they don't like, and he's resistant to that. That's sort of an encouraging sign.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Zuckerberg's speech at Georgetown, October 17th, and then of course that gets piled on to his appearance yesterday before the House Financial Services. So the news is kind of a blend of those two Washington D.C. appearances for him. He's getting himself into some, very deep water here, where he is philosophizing about free speech and free association, and the fourth estate, which is the media, and the fifth estate, which is sort of the social media, public opinion. One of my reactions is, who elected him? How did he get to decide all these things? I mean, these are incredibly important questions. I mean, conservatives have a long list of grievances against Facebook and social media in general, and of course, lots of other people do too. And it is interesting and revealing and useful to hear him speak in public about how he wants to address these issues of identification and truths and so on. But part of my reaction is, how did one guy who's 35 years old end up with so much power?
Well, yeah,
because he created a product that everyone around the world uses.
Yeah, and he's referencing how he's going to oversee that product, and probably, in point of fact, in to prevention of the government doing it for him. He's trying to sort of self-regulate and get the government to put a stamp of approval on it, so that they're not more intrusive than he otherwise would enjoy them being. Right?
Yeah, I actually think in the end, the attempt that he has to, as he said in this speech at Georgetown last week, create an oversight council, where he is going to pick 40 people from around the world, and it's 40 people covering 7.5 billion people around the world, to decide on these issues of content. I mean, if you think about 40 people for the world, that means the United States would get one or two. And it's sort of hard for me to imagine how one or two Americans, whoever they are, including me and my mother, could decide properly what all the content rules are. So, I mean, it's sort of astonishing how much power Facebook has accumulated, and I think disturbing to a lot of people.
I think you're right to point out, it's nice to offer these sort of high-minded paeans to the First Amendment and the exchange of ideas. The devil is going to be in the details of how Facebook actually operates. So I think that's a fair cautionary note. But I mean, in terms of the idea that the fifth estate could be social media, could be a check on the fourth estate, the way that it has been in so many ways, going back to, frankly, the George W. Bush National Guard story that ended Dan Rather's career, and not a minute too late, or too soon, I should say. But the idea that the fifth could be a check on the fourth, I mean, I think that has some attraction too, because number one, it speaks to sort of a free marketplace of ideas and exchange. Number two, the criticisms that conservatives have about the fifth estate, they have in spades with respect to the fourth estate.
Well, I think you're right. I think the idea of, broadly speaking, checks and balances is always good. And so if public opinion as sort of modified by social media, and again, all of us who speak out on Twitter or Facebook have to realize that some algorithm is deciding, how much of a voice we have within their media ecosystem. But it's nonetheless healthy to have that. I mean, it's a mix sometimes. I mean, you see, you cite quite rightly the incident from 2004 where, people in their pajamas, as it were, knocked out Dan Rather's fake story about George W. Bush. There are plenty of examples since of Twitter mobs and so on having an effect, and you could say it's the free market or the freedom at work, and that's certainly true. However, we have to beware of incidents where we think that it's free speech, but it's really being somehow manipulated by against some 35-year-old in Silicon Valley. And I think that's the concern people have, is that we're developing a sort of pseudo public opinion online that really is sort of what these people in San Francisco want us to have. And it's a concern, and I think the only solution is, frankly, a broader political input into these things, sort of, along the way that the Federal Communications Commission has supervised the telephone system over the last 100 years.
So, and then Mark Zuckerberg was at the Capitol yesterday in front of lawmakers, and they criticized him about his firm's policy not to fact-check political ads. And did you watch the hearing by any chance?
I did watch it. Yeah.
Did you learn anything? I know he's there to try to get his digital currency Libra pushed through.
This is the telephone company back in AT&T back in 1913 made a deal with the Justice Department and said, look, we are not going to regulate what people say on the telephone, whether it's the Communist Party or the Nazi Party or whoever. If they say this or that or the other, it is not our job to decide whether it's legal or not, or whether it's a criminal conspiracy. It's the government's job. So the FBI or the Justice Department or the Chicago police ought to be deciding whether this conversation is legal. But we here at AT&T, we are a pipeline company, and we are going to help people communicate, and we're not going to have the additional job of adjudicating the morality or legality of content. And, the cops in the FBI were perfectly happy to do that. And I think that Zuckerberg is both lighting the pipes and attempting to decide, what's right and proper or true or false. I think that's biting off way more than he can chew. Yeah,
no, there's no question about that. And even the concession I made up front about content that you'd say, well, that's not First Amendment protected. Should he be in that business, or does he risk, and may perhaps appropriately so, the same argument be made with respect to Google and other social media platforms, which is you are publishers of information now, and so you lose certain protections that you currently enjoy, and maybe that's a good start in terms of getting them to be more responsible and even-handed about content that particularly of a political nature.
Or just to say that others other than Facebook should judge. I mean, you can't have it both ways. You can't be both a utility and a publisher. All of our common sense about keeping power distributed and checked and balanced against each other tells us that the guy who controls the machine ought not to be able to control it when he wants to, and then not control it when he doesn't want to. And so, again, the only thing worse I can think of than Zuckerberg thinking that he should be able to run a false ad is if Zuckerberg decides he gets to decide what's a false ad. I mean, that would just be a complete tyranny. I think conservatives and Republicans especially need to be thinking to themselves, how could we possibly trust anyone with that kind of power? I mean, and again, I've written that there needs to be some sort of federal platform commission or something, or an expanded Federal Communications Commission to go through the rules on this, so that commissioners and can at least make sure it's public. I mean, the idea that some 29-year-old is making these decisions in a cubicle in Palo Alto, California, I mean, that is so full of danger to the Republic and to the Republican Party. I can't imagine anything worse.
He is Jim Pinkerton, co-chair of the Rate Coalition and contributor to the American Conservative, and as well as Breitbart. Check out his latest piece at theamericanconservative.com, which I tweeted out. Mark Zuckerberg gets medieval. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hey, if you're missing teeth or even a single tooth, then dental implants are a fantastic way to regain your confidence, your smile, and your dental health. Hey, Sean Hannity here. So what are you waiting for? Find out now if implants are for you. Successful implants don't come from an implant factory. Skill, treatment, installation, those are the main differences for successful lifelong implants. That's why you need to see Dr. Neruzzi at Fox River Periodontics. Dr. Neruzzi